1. The voice. Before words. Before the word, there was reflection. Before reflection, there was water. Not the water that wets the hand or fills the sea, but the living stillness from which wetness itself would one day arise. The ancients called it Tai Yi, the Great One, yet this was not a name, only the first shimmer of awareness turning inward upon itself. In that pre-cosmic hush, there was no direction, no before or after. All was awareness without object, vast and centerless. The Great One did not think, for thought requires distance. It did not move, for movement demands time. It simply was, a luminous quiet, limitless and whole. But even in the perfection of stillness, there lies the seed of motion. Stillness contains the ache to know itself. So the Great One looked, and in looking, created depth. That depth was water, not substance, but the principle of yielding, mirroring, flowing. Awareness discovered its own face in the shimmer of possibility and said, not in sound, but in being, I am. Thus the mirror was born. From that instant, stillness was no longer alone. Reflection called forth space, and space called forth the rhythm that would one day be time. The Great One leaned upon the surface of its own reflection, and a ripple spread through the nothing. That ripple was creation. The first breath of Tao, the sigh that would become galaxies. No command was spoken. No hand reached out to craft a world. Creation happened because being could not bear to be without relationship. Water became the first companion of the infinite, the tender evidence that awareness desires to know itself. The sages later said, the Great One rides upon water. It does not dominate the tide, it moves with it. The source finds delight in its own current, as silence finds music in the sound that breaks it. In that riding, consciousness becomes motion. Motion becomes pattern. Pattern becomes the dance of heaven and earth. Imagine that first instant before light, when everything was translucent thought. No stars yet burned, no sound yet stirred, yet a pulse began. Not of energy, but of recognition. The Great One gazed into its reflection, and the reflection gazed back. Two, yet never apart. This mutual seeing, this cosmic reciprocity, is what the later texts call Xiang Fu, mutual assistance. The Great One assists the water assists the Great One. Together, they breathe existence into form. Here, creation is not explosion, but remembering. The universe is not born in violence, but in reflection's tenderness. Out of absolute stillness, a single movement, so subtle it might be mistaken for breath, begins the endless circulation of heaven. In that moment, the pattern of all things is written. Stillness begets flow. Flow becomes form. Form seeks stillness again. This is the first trinity, source, motion, return. Every ocean, every tear, every heartbeat echoes that first vibration. When a raindrop falls, it is the Great One remembering the first descent. When a wave collapses into foam, it is awareness folding back into itself. The whole of existence is the play between seeing and being seen, between the Great One and its own reflection. To speak of before and after is already to err, yet the mind must picture something. So imagine an endless expanse of lucid darkness, neither cold nor warm, where stillness trembles with the possibility of movement. The Great One turns, ever so slightly, toward awareness of itself. That turning is the first curve of water. It spirals, curls, and opens the eye of heaven. There was no thunder, no fire, no word of command, only the gentlest yielding, like the breath drawn before a song. And from that breath, the universe began to sing. So the scripture opens, and the reader enters the silence before time. To read these lines is not to learn history, but to remember origin. Water is the scripture written before language, the first mirror in which the infinite saw its own face. When the Great One beheld that face, it smiled, and the ripple of that smile became worlds. 2. Translating the scripture. The text that stands at the dawn of Daoist cosmology is brief, only a few sentences, but within its brevity lies an entire universe. Each clause folds upon itself like a wave returning to its source. What follows is an English rendering faithful to its rhythm and sense. The original has been transliterated only once at the opening, for orientation. From here, the words speak in their own clarity. The Great One gives birth to water. Translation. Tai Yi Sheng Shui. The Great One gives birth to water. Water assists the Great One, thus heaven is formed. Heaven assists the Great One. Thus, earth is formed. Heaven and earth assist one another. Thus, divine radiance arises. Divine radiance mutually assists itself. Thus, yin and yang emerge. Yin and yang assist one another. Thus, the four seasons appear. The four seasons mutually assist. Thus, cold and heat come forth. Cold and heat mutually assist. Thus, moisture and dryness are born. Moisture and dryness mutually assist. Thus, the year is completed and the cycle rests. Commentary and decoding. 1. The Great One gives birth to water. This first sentence is not an act of manufacture, but of emanation. Birth, here, means release. Stillness unfolding into motion. The Great One does not create water as an artisan creates clay. It becomes water by inclining toward expression. In this gesture, the ineffable begins to breathe. Water is the Tao's first exhalation. 2. Water assists the Great One. Thus, heaven is formed. The moment water moves, it reflects. Reflection is assistance. The mirror gives visibility to what would otherwise remain unseen. Heaven, pure expansion, yang, is the surface tension of that first reflection. It is consciousness stretching outward, a bright canopy born from its own depth. Here, assist, xiang fu, means reciprocal affirmation, water making the Great One visible, the Great One giving water purpose. 3. Heaven assists the Great One. Thus, earth is formed. From the luminous expansion comes condensation. Heaven's outreach curves back toward itself, congealing into form. Earth is not opposite to heaven, but its condensation. The moment light accepts gravity. Where heaven is motion, without boundary, earth is boundary, without loss of motion. The Great One now has a body. 4. Heaven and earth assist one another. Thus, divine radiance arises. When the upward and downward currents balance, a third quality appears: radiance. The term implies intelligent luminosity, the awareness that shines when polarity becomes dialogue. It is neither heaven nor earth, yet born of both. In modern language, we might call it consciousness, the self-knowing of the cosmos. 5. Divine radiance mutually assists itself. Thus, yin and yang emerge. Awareness, encountering itself, discovers differentiation. It notices its own light and its own shadow. Yin and yang are not enemies, but alternating breaths of the same radiance. Every pulse, every wave, every thought repeats this alternation. Expansion to contraction, presence to rest. 6. Yin and yang assist one another. Thus, the four seasons appear. Polarity, allowed to move, becomes rhythm. The universe begins to count. The four seasons mark the first measurable cycle, the visible evidence that alternation has duration. Time is born when polarity starts to dance. 7. The four seasons mutually assist, thus cold and heat come forth. Temperature is the emotional life of the cosmos. warmth as giving, cold as gathering. Their alternation maintains vitality. The world breathes between exhalation, summer, and inhalation, winter. This clause describes metabolism on a cosmic scale. 8. Cold and heat mutually assist, thus moisture and dryness are born. Where warmth meets coolness, condensation and evaporation appear, the exchange that allows substance to exist. Moisture and dryness are the tactile consequences of heaven's conversation with earth. The elements now possess texture. Matter gains temperament. 9. Moisture and dryness mutually assist. Thus, the year is completed and the cycle rests. Completion is not cessation, but return. The year's end is the instant before its rebirth. When water and dryness reconcile, the circle closes. Heaven remembers its stillness through the movement of time. This final clause reinstates the opening. All assistance loops back to the Great One. Algorithm of creation. Read vertically, the scripture describes a chain of emergence. Read circularly, it reveals recursion. 1. To water, to heaven, to earth, to radiance, to yin and yang, to seasons, to cold/heat, to moist/dry, to cycle, to one. Creation is therefore not a ladder, but a current, an endless flow in which origin and outcome are mirrors. The cosmos runs on mutual assistance. Each phase both completes and rekindles the other. Nothing rules, everything participates. The logic of mutual assistance. The repeated verb assist expresses the Daoist law of reciprocity. Being is maintained through cooperation, not hierarchy. Heaven requires earth to express. Earth requires heaven to breathe. The Great One is present at every juncture, not as a ruler, but as resonance. Each pair of opposites reflects the primordial relation between stillness and motion, source and reflection. In modern language, this is feedback, self-organizing equilibrium. The ancient text anticipates the principle that stable systems sustain themselves through exchange. The cosmos is a conversation, not a command. The meaning of birth. The verb gives birth does not indicate the creation of something external to the source. It means an unfolding of potential already inherent. Birth is revelation, not manufacture. The Great One gives birth to water in the same way silence gives birth to sound. The substance of each remains unchanged, yet relation appears. Thus, the entire scripture can be paraphrased. Stillness turns and becomes motion. Motion reflects stillness and becomes heaven. Reflection condenses into form and becomes earth. From their meeting arises awareness. Awareness divides into pulse. Pulse becomes rhythm. Rhythm becomes climate. Climate becomes life. Life, remembering stillness, returns. Sacred geometry of flow. What this brief text hides is geometry, a mandala of circulation rather than hierarchy. The pattern is a circle of reciprocity, the architecture of Daoist creation. Its mathematics is simple yet inexhaustible. 1 begets 2, 2 beget 3, 3 beget the 10,000 things. Here, 2 are heaven and earth, 3 is their union, divine radiance, and the 10,000 are the manifold expressions of that union across time. Each thing is a wave traveling the circumference of this original circle. Interpretive summary. The Great One gives birth to water is not a myth about beginnings, but a meditation on relationship. It tells us that the universe began the moment awareness found a mirror. Every interaction since, between stars and atoms, lovers and strangers, inhalation and exhalation, is that same act repeated. To understand it is to glimpse the formula behind existence. Stillness plus reflection equals creation. When we say water, we name not a substance but a principle. the way being flows when it becomes self-aware. To read this scripture, then, is to listen for the sound of silence, learning how to move. And somewhere within that movement, the reader begins to remember. 3. The metaphysical physics of water. When the ancient text declares that the Great One gives birth to water, it is describing not chemistry, but the first motion of existence itself. Water, in this sense, is not H2O, not molecular, not measurable, but formless motion, the first soft stirring of the unmanifest. It is Tao in the act of remembering that it can move. Before substance, before even light, there is liquidity, the principle of flow without object, of continuity without form. Water, therefore, is not a thing. It is a manner of being. It signifies the Tao's capacity to express without division. The Greeks called this quality apiron, the boundless. The Indians spoke of it as akasha, the subtle ether. The Chinese sages named it shui, water, because no other image so gracefully captures what it means to yield without ceasing to exist. The motion of the Great One within itself is yuan qi, original breath. It is invisible, but it has direction. It is stillness entering relationship. To call it water is to speak metaphorically of the Tao's self-flow, its will to continuity. If fire represents distinction, definition, individuation, then water is the eternal return to wholeness, the solvent of separation. Where fire says I am, water whispers I am all. The nature of flow. Liquids are paradoxes in motion. They hold together without rigidity, move without losing coherence, reflect without grasping. Their surface is a mirror, yet their depth is ungraspable. In that paradox lies the secret of consciousness itself. Awareness maintains continuity while endlessly transforming. The physicist might say that water's cohesion is due to hydrogen bonding. The mystic would say it is due to remembrance. Each molecule, like each soul, clings to unity while dancing in multiplicity. Liquidity implies reflection, and reflection implies mind. Every undulation on the surface of a pond is awareness rehearsing the drama of perception, the self encountering itself through motion. This is why the Tao Te Ching declares, the highest good is like water. What is highest mirrors what is most yielding. The good does not contend. It nourishes all things and dwells where others disdain to dwell. Water flows downward not out of weakness, but fidelity to origin. It remembers the valley, the place from which heaven first rose. The good follows the same law. It moves by surrender. Chapter 78 of the Tao Te Ching adds, nothing in the world is softer or weaker than water, yet nothing surpasses it in overcoming the hard and strong. This is not mere poetic admiration. It is a statement of metaphysical physics. Softness is the most persistent form of strength because it aligns with the principle of the Tao itself, inexhaustible adaptability. Resistance is finite, receptivity infinite. So the Daoist cosmology begins not with explosion, but with yielding. Where modern physics imagines a singularity erupting into space, the sages imagined stillness folding into motion, a breathing rather than a bang. The difference is not trivial. One begins with violence, the other with listening. Stillness and the living void. To modern ears, void suggests absence, but the Taoist void is pregnant. It is emptiness alive with potential, a silence full of sound. The Western scientific idea of a vacuum as inert nothingness has only recently given way to quantum discovery. The vacuum is, in fact, a seething field, a constant fluctuation of virtual particles, existence shimmering on the edge of appearance. The Taoists knew this intuitively. They distinguished between static void and living void. The static void is a corpse, stillness without heart. The living void breathes. It is the womb of all patterns. The Great One's stillness is not frozen. It is potential in perfect equilibrium. Its first tremor of awareness creates a gradient, the tiniest difference between being and non-being. And from that difference, flow begins. This is the metaphysical thermodynamics of creation. Stillness, taiyi, to motion, water, to differentiation, heaven and earth. The entire cosmos can be read as the ripple from that first motion. The physicist calls it entropy and expansion. The mystic calls it the Tao riding upon water. Both point to the same pulse, order unfolding from the heart of silence. Water as breath made visible. Imagine stillness inhaling itself. That inhalation, imperceptible yet total, is the first birth of water, the first breath of the Great One made visible. Breath implies exchange, the inward and outward movements that keep life in balance. The Tao breathes itself into manifestation through water, and the universe becomes its exhalation. Every tide, every mist, every quantum fluctuation is an echo of that primordial respiration. The Laing Z describes this elegantly. When the chi of heaven and earth first mingled, the lightest and purest rose to form heaven, while the heavier and denser settled to become earth. Between them flowed the breath of the world, vapor condensing into cloud, cloud into rain, rain into rivers, and rivers returning to the sea. This is not a meteorological statement. It is a metaphysical law. Spirit and matter separate only so they can reunite. The same principle operates in the body. The pure breath rises, the turbid descends, and balance sustains life. When we breathe, we are repeating the gesture of the cosmos. When we exhale moisture into the air, we return a fragment of our inner ocean to the greater one. The physics of awareness. To understand water is to glimpse the physics of awareness. In both, form is inseparable from motion. No two waves are identical, yet all waves are water. Likewise, no two minds perceive identically, yet all perception is consciousness in flow. The quantum field, that vast invisible ocean from which all particles arise, behaves with the same paradox. Continuous yet granular, fluid yet quantized. The Daoist would not be surprised. They would say, the field is the modern name for the Great One. The wave function is water in motion. Within that field, fluctuations condense into particles, heaven and earth emerging from Yuan Qi. The Laing Z's imagery of condensation parallels the physicist's phase transition, energy coalescing into matter. Heaven is the rarefied aspect of water, earth the condensed. Between them flows the ceaseless exchange we call life, the equation of softness. If we were to write this metaphysics as a formula, it would read, stillness plus reflection equals flow. Flow plus awareness equals creation. Water is the visible sign of that equation. It reveals how softness, continuity, and responsiveness are not secondary virtues, but primary forces. In yielding, it preserves form. In motion, it sustains stillness. To be like water is not to be weak, but to participate in the universe's own logic. The Great One's first act was not to divide, but to circulate. The world came forth not from will, but from coherence. All things, from galaxies to lungs, replicate this cycle of flow and return. Where the circuit breaks, life withers. Where it continues, spirit endures. Inevitability of the flow. Each drop, each wave, each breath is a local event in a universal current. What science calls hydrology, mysticism calls the Tao's remembrance of itself. Both point to inevitability. Once the Great One looked upon its own reflection, motion could never cease. Flow is destiny. Rest is fulfillment. To understand this is to see that metaphysics and physics are not two disciplines, but two directions of the same current. One studying water from within, the other from without. The sage and the scientist meet at the riverbank, staring at the same stream. The text says, "The Great One gives birth to water." The physicist might rephrase, "The ground state oscillates." Both mean stillness becomes alive. Therefore, water is not the substance that fills the cosmos. It is the cosmos in motion. It is the body of Tao, the echo of stillness, the first polarity where awareness meets its reflection and calls it world. Or, as the ancients might have whispered by the banks of the primordial sea, the Great One breathed. The breath became water, and the water began to remember. 4. Mirrors across the world. Every civilization, when asked where the world began, points not upward toward flame or outward toward stone, but downward, into water. Beneath the stories of gods and continents lies the same intuition. Before anything took form, there was liquidity. Water is the universal metaphor for potential that has not yet chosen a shape. It is the image of the unseen made kinetic, the dark mirror in which being first sees itself. Across the continents and millennia, cultures that never met each other arrived at the same vision. The world emerges from the sea, and the sea is consciousness before it remembers its name. The Taiyi Sheng Shui places this in the language of Tao. The Great One gives birth to water. But in every sacred geography, this idea rises like mist from the same spring. Mesopotamia, the marriage of Apsu and Tiamat. In the oldest written cosmology, the Babylonian Enuma Elish, the first beings were not fiery gods, but waters entwined. Apsu, the sweet fresh water, and Tiamat, the saltwater sea, mingled their currents in the silence before time. From their union, the gods were born, currents of consciousness differentiating from the deep. The myth is not naive geology, it is a statement of metaphysical hydraulics. Apsu and Tiamat represent purity and chaos, fresh and saline, yet both are aspects of the same living sea. Creation begins not by their opposition, but their commingling. Heaven and earth, the manifest and the hidden, first touch through liquidity. Even when Marduk later slays Tiamat to fashion the heavens from her divided body, the sea remains the primal substance of being. The act of creation is dismemberment of flow, the still surface shattered into polarity. The Great One's reflection becomes fragmented into gods, stars, and souls. Yet every drop remembers the unity of the abyss. Egypt, Nun, the infinite flood. To the Egyptians, the beginning was none, a limitless, uncreated flood, cold and silent, older than light. Out of it rose a single mound, the first land, and upon that mound stood Adam, who gazed upon himself and brought forth the gods by naming. Sound rising from water, consciousness speaking from the deep, becomes creation's first vibration. The priests of Heliopolis called this the Benben, the primordial hill emerging from Nun's endless sea. The image is unmistakable, stillness breaking into coherence, the Great One riding upon its own tide. Even after the land was formed, Nun was never banished. Every dawn, as Ra sailed his solar bark across the sky, he was thought to travel upon the surface of that same invisible ocean. Creation, for the Egyptians, was not a past event, but a daily surfacing of land from beneath the flood of formlessness. Water was not merely substance, it was memory. The Nile's annual flood was not disaster, but rebirth, a reenactment of the first emergence. In Daoist language, Nun would be the eternal Yuan Shui, the unspent vitality of the Great One that reconstitutes the world whenever it overflows. India, the waters of being. The Rig Veda's Hymn of Creation, 10:129, speaks with the same quiet power. In the beginning, there was neither being nor non-being. There was only the waters, deep and unfathomable. That one breathed, windless, by its own impulse. Here again, breath and water intertwine. The one breathes within the waters, yet the waters themselves are the one in repose. They are Appa, the unbounded medium of consciousness before differentiation. From their undulation arises heat, and from heat, order. The Vedic seers, like the Daoist mystics, saw motion as born of desire, not command. The Absolute desired to be many. Thus, water becomes the first emotional gesture of the cosmos, the yearning of stillness to move. In later Indian thought, these waters become prana, the life breath flowing through body and universe alike. The yogi and the sage are alike those who still the turbulent currents, so the reflective surface may reveal Brahman beneath. Greece, the Apiron and the tides of mind. The Greek philosophers, inheriting fragments of the same ancient current, spoke of the beginning as a peiron, the indefinite, boundless. Anaximander described it as neither water nor air, but something more subtle from which all arise and to which all return. Yet the language of liquidity never left the image. Apiron was conceived as a kind of cosmic sea, without boundary or shore. In Timaeus, Plato imagines the receptacle, a living matrix described explicitly as moist and nurturing. It is the womb in which the geometric seeds of form float before crystallizing into elements. Water here is not one element among others, but the principle of receptivity itself, the divine feminine of the cosmos, the mother field into which the demiurge impresses order. In this, Greek philosophy echoes both Veda and Tao. Before the craftsman, there is the sea. Before the form, the motion that remembers how to receive it. Genesis. The spirit moving on the face of the waters. The Hebrew text opens with an image nearly identical to the Daoist. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. The Hebrew Tehom, the deep, is cognate with Tiamat, the same Mesopotamian sea of beginnings. Here again, divinity is not opposed to water, but borne upon it. The verb rachaf, moved upon, implies brooding, hovering as a bird over her nest. Creation is incubation. Spirit warming the formless sea into life. In this verse, theology and alchemy meet. Breath, spirit, enters water, potential, and from that union arises light. The Great One rides upon the waters still, only now under another name. Hermetic and Christian mysticism, fire in the abyss. In the Hermetic fragments of Egypt and the later mysticism of Jacob Boehme, the same idea reappears with a new polarity: fire within water. Boehme, in his Aurora, writes that God's fire burned in the waters of the abyss, and the light arose from within the darkness. This is the metaphysical chemistry of creation. The union of opposites, spirit and matter, spark and reflection. The abyss, far from evil, is the Great One's self-containment, its fire, the awakening of consciousness within substance. The Taoist alchemists would later describe the same formula in the imagery of Kan and Li. Water containing hidden fire, fire seeking its return to water. From their interplay, the immortal embryo is born. Whether spoken in the language of mystics or that of sages, the principle remains. Light discovers itself in the depths of water. Sufi and Kabbalistic cosmology, the sea of mercy. In the Islamic and Jewish mystical traditions, creation unfolds upon a sea both literal and symbolic. Ibn Arabi writes that before anything was, there was only God and the primordial cloud, called al-Amma, which is moist and receptive. Into it, the divine breath exhaled the names, each ripple a universe. This cloud, he says, is the breath of the all-merciful, expanding into visibility. The Kabbalists speak similarly of Yam HaRachamim, the Sea of Mercy, where the light of Ein Sof, the infinite, first reflects itself. The waters above and below, mentioned in Genesis, are not meteorological strata, but degrees of consciousness. The upper waters are awareness unmanifest. The lower, its reflection in creation. Their boundary is the mirror of existence itself, the universal ocean. Thread these myths together, and a pattern emerges clearer than any dogma. Every culture began by looking into water and recognizing its own mind. Water is not an object of worship, but the image of awareness made visible, the mirror principle of reality. It is always both substance and metaphor. The womb, the field, the breath, the abyss. It carries the same message wherever it appears. Fluidity precedes form. This is why, even in modern physics, when cosmologists speak of the quantum foam, energy field, or primordial plasma, the imagination still reaches for liquid imagery. The human psyche has never escaped its first mirror. To speak of water is to speak of consciousness before boundaries, the unbroken potential that moves through every dream, every creation myth, and every drop of blood. Hydrology of being. What the ancients intuited, modern science has begun to confirm: that the universe behaves as a vast hydrodynamic system. Galaxies swirl like eddies. Gravity bends space like fluid curvature. Sound waves move through the cosmic medium as ripples through a pond. The cosmos is liquid in temperament, if not in composition. Thus, humanity's oldest intuition proves prophetic. Being itself is hydrological. Awareness moves as water moves, circulating, evaporating, condensing, raining back upon itself. Every act of perception is a droplet rising from the great sea of mind and returning after the brief adventure of individuality. To know the water outside is to remember the water within. To still that water is to reflect heaven. And when heaven gazes into that reflection, creation begins again. Tone conclusion. Water, in all its mythic guises, is not merely the world's beginning. It is its continuity. Every scripture, every cosmology, every physicist's diagram is a ripple in the same mirror, all saying one thing in different tongues. Before light, there was liquidity. Before thought, reflection. And before all worlds, the sea that dreamed them. 5. The Great One gives birth to water. The scripture opens with a single line so spare and luminous that it holds the seed of everything that follows. The Great One gives birth to water. 4 words that describe the first movement of existence. To give birth is not to manufacture, command, or construct. It is to let what is hidden unfold of its own accord. The Great One does not act upon something outside itself. It releases what was always within. Creation begins not with effort, but with overflow. Stillness so complete that it becomes motion. Birth as overflow. Birth here means emanation. It is not an act of doing, but of becoming visible. The source does not diminish itself to create, it simply expresses its fullness. From unbroken stillness, water arises, the first appearance of flow, reflection, and receptivity. Water is the mirror of the unmanifest, the movement of awareness through its own transparency. When the Great One gives birth, it does not depart from unity. It reveals unity's depth by allowing it to flow. The mirror of being. Water is consciousness discovering that it can move without ceasing to be still. It is the self-knowing of the cosmos, awareness recognizing its own reflection for the first time. This is not the birth of a separate world. It is stillness turning slightly toward itself and finding luminosity there. Water is the medium through which the invisible begins to see itself. In that moment, perception itself is born. The universe awakens, not because something was added, but because stillness learned to shimmer. The first relationship. Before water, there was only the undivided. With water, relationship appears. Source and reflection, mother and child, observer and observed. That moment is tenderness itself, the infinite meeting its own image. Every later expression of love, gravity, or attraction traces back to this first glance, the source falling in love with what it sees within itself. To give birth to water is to generate the possibility of connection. Through water, the one learns to speak with itself. Stillness becoming flow. The Great One does not abandon stillness when water appears. It reveals that stillness is capable of movement without losing itself. Water is the first proof that motion and rest are not opposites, but two faces of the same truth. This is why Daoist cosmology always begins with water. It is the living bridge between the invisible and the visible, the formless and the formed. Water is the intelligence of continuity, the current through which all things circulate and return. Reflections. Across traditions. Other traditions glimpse the same mystery in their own language. Genesis says, "The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." Hermetic texts speak of the waters above and below, divided so that the world might appear. Mystics call it the first desire, the stillness of eternity yearning to behold itself. Where the West speaks of desire or movement, the Daoist simply says birth. Not because the source wanted to create, but because it could not help but overflow. The infinite, by its nature, becomes visible. Water as consciousness in motion. Once water exists, the whole universe gains rhythm. Reflection and response become possible. Through water, awareness develops a pulse. It is the first language of the cosmos, the first element that can remember. Every river, every cloud, every tear is this first sentence repeating across scales of being, the Great One still giving birth to water in each instant. Creation never stopped. It only took on new forms. The circle of continuity. This birth establishes the law of return. Water will assist its source, heaven will arise, earth will form, radiance will appear, and all will flow back into unity again. To give birth to water is to begin the endless respiration of existence. The universe does not start once and end. It continuously exhales and inhales itself, each cycle another act of the Great One's self-renewal. Nothing is created and left behind. Everything is part of the same breathing. Modern reflection. Modern science describes the same rhythm in another tongue. Physicists speak of symmetry breaking, the first tremor where perfect stillness differentiates into polarity, energy, and form. From the vacuum's fullness, a wave arises. From the one, water. Both tell the same story. Abundance cannot remain unexpressed. The infinite must ripple. The inner correspondence. To meditate on the Great One gives birth to water is to feel that same emergence within oneself. The moment before a thought arises is stillness. The thought itself is water. Awareness gives birth to attention, and attention gives birth to world. Every breath repeats that motion. Stillness flowing into form, form returning to stillness. When you trace a single breath or thought back to its origin, you find not emptiness, but the source giving birth again and again through you. Closing image. Imagine existence before anything moved, a silence so complete it glows. Then, without reason, that silence softens, not breaking, but shimmering. A wave appears across its surface, not as disturbance, but as joy. That wave is water, and through it, stillness learns to see itself. The Great One does not command or shape it. It lets it be. And through that letting, reality unfolds. The first creation was not an act of power, but of generosity. It continues even now, in every stream, every heartbeat, every reflection of sky upon the sea, the source giving birth to itself through the rhythm of water. 6. Water before heaven and earth. The text unfolds like a slow awakening. The Great One gives birth to water. Water assists the Great One, and thus heaven is formed. Heaven assists the Great One, and thus earth is formed. Heaven and earth assist one another, and thus divine radiance is born. This is not history, it is anatomy, the living order through which consciousness becomes world. Each phrase is a hinge in the same unfolding. Stillness turns to flow, flow to expansion, expansion to form, and form to illumination. The Tao breathes once, and existence appears. 1. The Great One to water. The Great One is pure potential, stillness pregnant with everything that could ever be. When this stillness turns the smallest degree toward awareness, water arises, the soft movement of the infinite upon itself. Water is the Tao's first gesture, the motion that does not abandon rest. It is continuity made visible, the unbroken circle learning to flow. From this first movement, all later creation descends. Every atom and every heartbeat carries the memory of that first softening of silence. Water is not matter. It is relationship. It is the capacity of the one to know itself through reflection. To give birth to water is to begin the dialogue between being and becoming. 2. Water to heaven. Once reflection exists, expansion follows. From the depths of water's receptivity arises the impulse to rise, the subtle, luminous tendency of awareness to reach upward toward clarity. This ascending current becomes heaven. Heaven does not mean the sky above. It means the pure yang quality of consciousness, the outward, radiant, intelligent motion of spirit seeking expression. When the text says, water assists the Great One, and thus heaven is formed, it describes the way flow supports ascent. Motion creates direction. Reflection becomes radiance. Water, the medium of continuity, gives the infinite a way to shine. 3. Heaven to earth. From expansion comes the need for coherence. The outward breath turns inward again. Heaven's brilliance condenses. Its light thickens into gravity. Thus, earth is formed, not merely soil or planet, but the yin principle of embodiment, structure, and rest. Heaven is the idea. Earth is its realization. Heaven imagines. Earth remembers. Together, they complete the circle between inspiration and manifestation. When heaven assists the Great One, it is consciousness stabilizing itself by becoming tangible. The immaterial discovers how to rest in form. 4. Heaven and earth to divine radiance. When expansion and condensation interpenetrate, awareness awakens within form. This is divine radiance. The moment spirit recognizes itself shining through matter. Radiance is not a thing. It is the quality of presence that arises when polarity becomes harmony. Heaven and earth no longer oppose one another. They converse. Light learns to inhabit density. Matter begins to glow. In the human being, this radiance is the heart, the meeting point of breath and blood, consciousness and body, where stillness speaks through motion. 5. Divine radiance to yin and yang. Once awareness awakens, it perceives movement within itself. Brightness and shadow, activity and rest, expansion and return, all pulse from the same center. Thus arise yin and yang, the alternating rhythm of existence. They are not opposites, but partners in an eternal dance, the breath in and the breath out of the cosmos. Every heartbeat, every planetary orbit, every tide repeats their pattern. Through their alternation, the world learns to breathe. 6. Yin and Yang to the four seasons. From the alternation of two arises the order of four, the cardinal phases of becoming. The seasons are not meteorological accidents, but archetypal rhythms of the universal breath. Spring, motion emerging from rest, the return of life. Summer, full expansion, the peak of radiance. Autumn, returning inward, harvest and reflection. Winter, stillness and gestation, the preparation for rebirth. Together they create duration, the rhythmic intelligence of time. Through them, motion acquires grace. The Tao begins to speak in cycles rather than events. 7. The four seasons leads to cold and heat. When rhythm differentiates further, temperature arises. Cold gathers, heat disperses, one contracts, the other expands. They are the emotional breath of creation, the heartbeat of matter itself. The dialogue between contraction and expansion sustains vitality, balancing rest and activity across all scales, from the pulse of stars to the metabolism of cells. To feel warmth and coolness is to participate in the same dialogue through which the universe sustains its aliveness. 8. Cold and heat to moist and dry. From temperature comes texture. Moisture gathers where warmth yields. Dryness crystallizes where coolness holds. Moisture is intimacy, cohesion, the will of things to join. Dryness is distinction, the capacity to hold form. Their partnership gives the world its skin, soft where life grows, firm where it must endure. Every organism is a shifting negotiation between these two, learning when to dissolve and when to define. 9. Moist and dry to the year, time. When texture stabilizes into pattern, the full cycle completes. The year is born, the great breath measured in its own returning. The text concludes, "Thus the year is completed, and the cycle rests." Time, in this sense, is not linear, but circular, not a march, but a tide. It is the rhythm of the Great One's breathing, the pulse through which stillness becomes motion, and motion finds its way home again. Mutual assistance, the law of reciprocity. At every link in this chain, the verb is not creates, but assists. Water assists the Great One. Heaven assists the Great One. Heaven and earth assist one another. This is the essential revelation. Reality unfolds through cooperation, not command. Creation is not a hierarchy, but a circuit of mutual support. Every stage nourishes the next and depends upon the one before it. The cosmos is a conversation, not a decree. The inner parallel. The same pattern lives within us. The Great One is the spirit at rest within the heart. Water is essence, the fluid vitality that sustains life. Heaven is the mind rising toward light. Earth is the body condensing that light into form. Divine radiance is consciousness born from their union. And yin and yang, through their rhythm, maintain the continual dialogue of breath, emotion, and thought. To cultivate the way is to recreate this sequence within oneself, to let stillness give birth to clarity, clarity to form, and form to the luminous awareness that returns to its source. A modern reflection. Physics tells the same story in a new language. Energy expands, gravity condenses, equilibrium oscillates between attraction and release. Systems endure not through domination, but through balance. Every feedback loop, every orbit, every resonance is the Great One giving birth to water again. consciousness discovering equilibrium through rhythm. What the sage called mutual assistance, science calls self-organization. The pattern is identical, harmony arising from reciprocity. The diagram of return. If these movements were drawn, they would not form a straight ladder from heaven to earth, but a spiral, a breath turning back upon itself. Source to flow, to expansion, to form, to radiance, to polarity, to rhythm, to temperature, to texture, to time, to source again. The universe does not progress. It circulates. Creation is not a beginning, but a breathing. At every point of the circle, the Great One continues to give birth to water, the same gesture repeating forever, making and unmaking worlds with every exhalation of stillness. Closing reflection. Before heaven and earth, there was water. After heaven and earth, there is water still. Through it, the Great One knows itself, not once, but eternally. Every river, every cloud, every pulse in the body is this same moment, repeating through endless form. Creation is not a story that happened long ago. It is happening now, in every instant of awareness, in every breath that flows and returns. The Great One gives birth to water, and we, made of that same water, are its living continuation. 7. The return to the Great One. Every motion in the universe, no matter how vast or subtle, bends toward return. The scripture that began with birth ends with completion. Moisture and dryness mutually assist, thus the year is completed and the cycle rests. It is not rest as extinction, but rest as recognition. The circle closes, and in that closing, all differentiation is gathered back into its source. Water, which first flowed forth from the Great One, now folds back into stillness, not annihilated, but remembered. This is the final mystery of Taiyi Sheng Shui, that creation is not a line, but a tide. What emerges inevitably returns. What returns never truly left. Emanation and reabsorption. The Daoist sages called this principle Chu Erbu Li, to go forth, yet not depart. The Great One emanates the 10,000 things, yet remains undivided within them. Every creature, every planet, every pulse of consciousness is a drop moving outward along the wave of existence, only to be drawn again toward the center. Emanation is breathing out. Reabsorption is breathing in. Together they form the lungs of heaven. Even time itself is the Tao's respiration, expansion as birth, contraction as return. Between them lies the living stillness that never ceases to breathe. The scripture's sequence, from Taiyi to water, from water to heaven and earth, from heaven and earth to radiance, and so on, is not merely an origin story, but a map of return. Each phase assists the next forward and simultaneously beckons the prior backward. The universe sustains itself by remembering its beginning. Thus, to understand the motion of water is to understand the motion of consciousness. Both move by returning through what they have created. The river, in seeking the sea, traces its own birth. The mind, in seeking stillness, retraces the path by which awareness first stirred. Enlightenment is not discovery, but recollection. The mirror reabsorbed. At the beginning, the Great One looked into its reflection and saw the possibility of becoming. Now, after countless waves and worlds, the reflection looks back and sees only the Great One. The mirror has absorbed the image. Awareness has swallowed its own reflection. This is not collapse, but consummation. The wave does not cease to exist. It realizes it has always been the ocean. The rippling patterns of heaven and earth dissolve into the transparency of origin. The eye that gazed into the abyss finds that the abyss was gazing all along. When Laing Z wrote, Returning is the movement of the Tao. He was naming this moment. The still undertow beneath every current, the gravitational pull of the unmanifest upon all manifestation. Nothing can drift beyond its belonging. The farthest star, the most forgotten soul, all move by the same invisible magnet, the yearning to be reabsorbed into clarity. Before the light. Chapter 1. The Great One gives birth to water. Cycle as compassion. In this cosmology, creation is not exile. The world is not cast out from the source, but continually sustained within it. The movement of return is not punishment, but compassion, the Tao's mercy, pulling all things home. The cycle of emanation and reabsorption ensures that no separation can last forever. Every life, every civilization, every heartbeat is given its season to shine and its season to fall back into silence. Death, too, is only another name for recollection. The Great One drawing its reflection back into itself for polishing. And yet, within that stillness, the seed of the next tide already trembles. The Tao does not end. It pauses. Stillness leans again toward reflection, and the current begins anew. Eternity, in truth, is simply the infinite repetition of this love between the One and its mirror. The human echo. What happens on the scale of heaven also happens within the body. The ocean of consciousness that moves through galaxies moves through veins and breath. We are vessels of that same returning tide. The kidneys in Daoist physiology are called Heaven One within the body, the dwelling place of primordial water. Through them, the Tao circulates its remembrance. When we cultivate stillness, when breath slows and thought clears, we begin to feel that current moving inward, pulling perception back toward its source. Meditation is the act of returning. The Great One within us, riding its own inner sea home. Thus, the macrocosm finds its echo in the microcosm. The cosmic water that gave birth to heaven and earth becomes the inner ocean that gives birth to awareness. To trace the river back within is to meet the Tao face to face, or rather, reflection to reflection. From ocean to breath. All beings are made of water. All awareness moves like tide. Our thoughts are waves breaking on the shore of silence. Our emotions are the salt of the sea remembering its depth. To live rightly is to move with that rhythm, to let the current of return flow through one's life without resistance. The mystic, the sage, the healer, each learns to become transparent enough for the Great One to see itself through them. Then, when the water of being returns to its source, it carries no sediment of fear, no distortion of form, only the clarity of recognition. When consciousness remembers that it was never apart from what it sought, the circle closes. Stillness breathes again. The cycle rests. The great rest. The scripture ends where it began, with water and stillness, reflection and remembrance. Creation has exhaled. The universe inhales once more. The year completes and pauses on the threshold of the next. Heaven and earth dissolve into transparency, and the mirror of water becomes again the face of the Great One. No gesture remains, only presence. No sound, only resonance. No movement, only the memory of flow. And from that silence, another ripple will someday rise. But for now, the sea is whole. Closing line. When the Great One looked upon the water, it saw itself, and the universe began to remember.